We are in the middle of that storm right now, and I don't see it breaking anytime soon. We may not be facing actual shortages in the world right now, but we do have a very low level of spare capacity. And that's done a lot to raise speculation on the futures market. When spare capacity is so low, any major disruption in supply could actually lead to shortages. Investors need to know that we're finding a new barrel of oil for every barrel that we sell. But that's not what they're seeing. At the same time, they're seeing that ethanol has major limits as a replacement fuel. Ethanol makes up only between 1.5 and 3% of our transportation fuels, and we're learning that there are real costs to increasing that percentage. I don't support mandates for ethanol, though, as you all know. I've led the fight to provide incentives for it through the CLEAR Act. But I'm also a realist about the fact that ethanol cannot put a major dent in our need for fossil fuels at this time. Corn needs a lot of water. In fact, it needs about 780 barrels of water for a barrel of ethanol and more than 1,000 barrels of water for the equivalent of a barrel of oil. Then it needs another 3 barrels to turn the corn into liquid fuel. Now, that's a huge amount of water, but it works out all right so far because corn is grown in already wet areas or rainy areas. But if we want to increase the amount of ethanol available, we're going to have to move into drier areas and rely more on irrigation. And there will be limits as to how much more we can afford to grow. It also uses a lot of land and potential wildlife habitat. 1 acre of corn produces 7 to 10 barrels of ethanol, or the equivalent of 5 to 7 barrels of oil. Now, that's a lot of land, and it would take a lot more to make a real dent in our energy supply needs, and we all need to grow up and realize that. A lot has been, and I'm for ethanol, by the way, a lot has been said about cellulosic ethanol, but a cellulosic ethanol plant would cost about 5 times as much as a corn ethanol plant of the same size. We're also learning that ethanol production has an energy balance that is not that attractive. And now some are saying it has a greenhouse gas footprint, and that is troubling. I'm not here to trash ethanol because we need it, and I support it. But I think you ought to recognize that it has limits. I may be the only one in this room who believes so, but I feel very strongly that we must also increase our domestic production of oil and natural gas to keep things running in this country. We run on oil. But it's obvious to me that we must aggressively promote alternative transportation fuels at the same time. So where does that leave us? If the most significant alternative transportation fuel has so many problems, it leaves us with the alternative transportation fuel that has the greatest potential but gets the least amount of attention. In other words, the electric grid. The electric grid is so well established and has been around so long that it can seem like a pretty mundane topic. However, if you begin to add up the various benefits the grid could provide as an alternative transportation fuel, you can't help but get excited. I've heard plenty of policymakers and environmental groups point to the need to promote solar, wind, and geothermal energy as an answer to high gas prices. And there's a gradual movement by some environmentalists towards nuclear as one of the cleanest sources of energy. And especially if we want to go to hydrogen. We have about 9 million tons of hydrogen in this country, but to have a hydrogen car system work, you'd have to have at least 150 million tons in the infrastructure. Well, we don't have that today. We do have the ability to develop hydrogen cars, which, as you know, are very clean. Well, obviously, cars and trucks, they don't run on electricity, so some of the arguments that have been used really don't follow. But what if we changed all that? What if I could begin to apply hydroelectric, solar, and geothermal nuclear and natural gas-generated electricity to our transportation sector? Talk about adding diversity to our transportation fuels. Even when it gets its electricity from a coal-fired power plant, a plug-in hybrid provides an environmental improvement over a conventional gasoline vehicle. Almost immediately after the CLEAR Act was enacted into law, I began the effort to draft S-1617, the Freedom Act, which stands for, are you ready for this? the Fuel Reduction Using Electrons to End Dependence on the Mideast Act of 2007. Now you all know why I wear a Mickey Mouse watch here in Washington. It became quickly apparent to me that in terms of technology and industry focus, the United States is positioned to lead the world into the future with plug-in electric motor vehicles. The Freedom Act would help our nation to take up that position by helping to develop the market, the technology, and the domestic production capacity needed to fulfill that role. The Freedom Act's goals, and I hope you'll all advocate for it while you're here, would be achieved through four strong tax incentives. First, a tax credit for consumers who purchase plug-in electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Second, for a limited time, a tax credit for consumers who convert their hybrid vehicles to high-quality plug-in electric vehicles. Third, I shouldn't say electric, but plug-in hybrid vehicles, which will include electric. Third, a strong incentive for the U.S. manufacturer of plug-in vehicles and of major components of plug-in vehicles, such as batteries, electric motors, and electronic controllers. And finally, a tax credit for electric utilities that provide rebates to customers who purchase plug-in electric drive vehicles. Now, Freedom Act consumer credits would promote the consumer purchase of vehicles which use batteries and which plug into the electric grid for at least part of their power. This would include plug-in electrics, plug-in hybrids, and others. The amount of the credit would be based on the kilowatt hours of the vehicle's battery pack with a cap of $7,500 for passenger vehicles. The same is true of heavier duty type vehicles, except that the caps are scaled up for each vehicular weight class. Freedom conversion credits would go to hybrid electric vehicle owners who choose to convert their existing hybrid vehicle to a high-quality plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. These credits would also be they would be scaled to the kilowatt hours of the new battery installed in their vehicle. Only high-quality conversion kits, which are certified to meet all highway safety and emission standards, would qualify for a Freedom conversion credit. And the credits would be available until the market transitions to commercially available plug-in hybrid vehicles. When we transition to that, that's when the credit would be mostly available. Now, this particular provision is strongly supported by my friend Senator John Kerry, who is planning to speak to you following my remarks. And Representative Inslee is a great leader on Capitol Hill. I think you'll really enjoy his remarks. As you have probably heard, due to important personal matters, Senator Kerry won't be able to make it today. And in his absence, let me just say that Senator Kerry has been one of my strongest allies on the Senate Finance Committee on all of these proposals we have discussed this morning. The Freedom Act also offers first-year expensing for companies setting up production capacity in the United States for plug-in electric drive vehicles and for major components of those vehicles. Finally, in the case that an electric utility in the U.S. chooses to offer rebates to customers who purchase plug-in electric drive vehicles, the Freedom Act would reimburse that utility or those utilities for part of that rebate in the form of a Freedom Utility Credit. The amount of the government reimbursement would be based on the rate of greenhouse gas emissions for each utility. Based on our recent findings about ethanol, there really isn't a major alternative transportation fuel that can reduce greenhouse gases. But the electric grid is 30% renewable today. It's going to take some work to continue to make the electric grid cleaner and greener, but it is already way ahead of transportation fuels, and it has much more potential for further improvements. An element of the national grid that I really appreciate is that it's domestic. That's a key thing.